The wind howled as Isabella's carriage made its slow and uneven way up the narrow, winding road that led to the estate of her late aunt and uncle, perched on the precipice of a jagged cliff. The landscape surrounding the mansion seemed to be suspended in time, untouched by the march of civilization. The trees on either side of the path were gnarled and twisted, their skeletal branches reaching out like desperate fingers trying to claw their way toward the sky. The air itself felt thick and oppressive, carrying with it an unnatural chill that seeped into Isabella's bones despite the heavy woolen cloak draped around her shoulders. She had heard whispers of the Blackwood estate for years. Tales passed down from relatives, from strangers who spoke of the place with hushed reverence or fearful disdain. A place where time seemed to stand still, where the very earth beneath the ground hummed with the secrets of centuries gone by. Isabella had never met her aunt, Lady Eleanor, or any of her distant family, but with the sudden death of her parents in a tragic accident, she was left with no choice but to seek refuge in this forgotten corner of the world. The mansion itself loomed ahead, its silhouette dark against the brooding sky. As the carriage passed through a rusted iron gate, its hinges squealing like the cries of some ancient creature, Isabella felt a wave of unease settle over her. The mansion was enormous, its towering spires piercing the gray clouds above. The walls, once white and majestic, were now choked with creeping ivy, their surface marred by the slow encroachment of time and nature. The windows, blackened and empty, stared out like hollow eyes, gazing across the cliffs to the sea below, where the waves crashed violently against the rocks. It was a place untouched by warmth, cold in both structure and spirit. As they drew closer to the entrance, Isabella could make out the intricate carvings that adorned the massive wooden doors. Scenes of strange, otherworldly creatures and arcane symbols were etched into the dark oak, their significance lost to time. The mansion seemed to beckon her, yet something about it made her heart quicken, her breath catch in her throat. It was as if the house itself was watching her approach, aware of her arrival, awaiting her. Inside the carriage, her only companion was her aunt, Lady Eleanor, a woman who had sent her no letters or correspondence prior to this meeting. Isabella's only knowledge of her aunt came from the few whispers she'd overheard as a child, rumors that painted Lady Eleanor as an enigmatic figure, a woman of great wealth but even greater reclusion. She was said to possess an otherworldly beauty, even in her later years, though there was something unnerving about her, something that made people speak of her in fearful tones. Isabella had little desire to meet her in person, but her circumstances left her no alternative. Lady Eleanor sat across from Isabella in the carriage, her hands folded delicately in her lap. She was a striking figure, her pale skin a sharp contrast against the dark, somber fabric of her gown. Her raven-black hair was tied in an elegant knot, and her eyes, dark as night, held an unsettling depth, as if they could peer into the very soul of anyone they fixed upon. Isabella's gaze wandered to her aunt's face, but Lady Eleanor's expression remained inscrutable, her lips pressed tightly together in a way that suggested she had no interest in offering words of comfort. "Do not be alarmed by the house. My dear," Lady Eleanor finally spoke, her voice low and musical, but with a strange edge to it, as though it were not entirely meant for this world. "It is a place of great history. And even greater sorrow. You will find its moods change with the seasons, just as you must learn to adapt to its rhythms." Isabella nodded absently, though she could not shake the feeling that her aunt's words held a deeper meaning, one that was veiled in cryptic layers. The carriage continued its journey, passing beneath the arches of a long-forgotten stone bridge that connected the mansion's estate to the rest of the world. Beyond the bridge, the path narrowed further, winding through a dark, overgrown forest where the trees seemed to whisper in the wind. As the carriage finally came to a halt in front of the mansion's grand entrance, Isabella's heart pounded in her chest. The towering double doors opened slowly, groaning on their ancient hinges, and a figure emerged from the shadows within. It was Edgar, the family's longtime servant, his figure as gaunt and pale as the mansion itself. His eyes, hollow and distant, flickered with a brief, unreadable emotion as he extended his hand to assist Isabella down from the carriage. "Welcome, Miss Isabella," Edgar said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a certain formality to his tone, but something else lingered beneath it, an undertone of unease that Isabella could not quite place. As Isabella stepped inside, she was immediately struck by the stifling darkness of the house. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories. Faded tapestries lined the walls, their once vibrant colors now dulled by time, and the flickering light of candles cast eerie shadows that seemed to dance on their own accord. The grand staircase spiraled upward, its banisters intricately carved with symbols of an unknown origin, and the floor beneath her feet was covered in a thick layer of dust, as though the house had been abandoned for years. Lady Eleanor took Isabella's hand, her touch cold and firm. "Come, my dear," she murmured, leading her through the labyrinthine halls. "There is much to see, and much to learn. But first, we must allow you to rest. The house is an old creature, and it will take time to understand it." Isabella's heart beat faster as she followed her aunt through the dimly lit corridors, but there was no turning back now. The mansion seemed to whisper around her, its creaking walls speaking in a language only the house itself could understand. She felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as though the house knew her more intimately than she knew herself. As the night deepened, the mansion settled into an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional howl of the wind. But in the darkness, there was something more, an almost palpable presence that hung in the air. Waiting. It was as if the mansion itself was holding its breath, and somewhere deep within its cold, stone walls, something ancient and malevolent was stirring, just waiting for the right moment to make its presence known. Isabella, unaware of the shadows closing in around her, lay in the unfamiliar bed, unable to shake the sense that the mansion was not merely a place of residence, but a living, breathing entity. The night was far from over, and the true nature of the Blackwood estate was just beginning to reveal itself. The night that followed Isabella's arrival at the Blackwood estate was thick with an unnatural stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of the mansion settling. As though it too were adjusting to her presence. After Lady Eleanor's cryptic words and the unsettling silence of the mansion's corridors, Isabella retired to her assigned room in the east wing. She felt an inexplicable unease, a deep discomfort that seemed to saturate the very air she breathed. The room itself was vast and decorated in a somber grandeur that hinted at former elegance. Faded velvet curtains lined the tall, arched windows, their edges frayed with age, while antique furniture stood like sentinels, watching silently. The four-poster bed was draped in heavy, dark silk sheets, and the floor beneath her feet was covered in a thick, worn carpet, its intricate patterns now obscured by the dust of years gone by. There was a faint, musty scent that lingered in the air, mingling with the ever-present smell of decay from the house itself. The walls, adorned with tarnished silver-framed paintings, depicted scenes of aristocratic life, yet their haunting quality was undeniable. Figures in the portraits seemed to follow her with their eyes, their faces drawn in solemnity, their expressions distant, as though they too had borne witness to the mansion's slow descent into darkness. As Isabella sank into the bed, her mind raced. The house felt alive, as though it had a consciousness all its own. The dim light from the hearth in her room cast long, flickering shadows on the walls, and with each gust of wind, The branches of the trees outside seemed to scrape against the windows, making her feel as though something was watching her from the darkness beyond. Her sleep was fitful, plagued by dreams that seemed too real, too vivid. She dreamt of herself walking through the winding corridors of the mansion, lost and unable to find her way out. She passed through rooms she had never seen before, dust-covered libraries with shelves of ancient books, a forgotten ballroom where tattered curtains hung like shrouds, and a vast, empty dining hall where the echoes of laughter seemed to linger long after the guests had departed. In the dream, she could hear someone calling her name, soft, coaxing whispers that came from the shadows. It was the voice of a woman, a voice that felt strangely familiar, yet foreign. Isabella tried to call out in return, but her voice was trapped in her throat, her body heavy and immobile. She felt the temperature in the room drop, the air becoming thick and suffocating, and in that moment, she realized she was not alone. There, standing in the doorway, was a pale figure dressed in a flowing gown of black velvet. The woman's face was obscured by the shadow of her bonnet, but her eyes, dark and endless, glowed with a faint, unnatural light. Isabella stepped closer to inspect them, her fingers trembling as they brushed lightly against the cold stone. Her touch seemed to stir something, as if the walls themselves were alive and reacting to her presence. She drew her hand back quickly, startled by the sensation. The symbols seemed to shimmer in the dim light, as if they were moving, changing, shifting before her eyes. She felt a strange compulsion to memorize them, to understand their meaning, but before she could examine them any further, she heard a soft, shuffling sound from the top of the stairs. A voice, muffled and distant, reached her ears. It was Edgar, calling her name. The tension in Isabella's chest tightened, and she reluctantly backed away from the symbols, her heart racing. She glanced around the room once more, her eyes scanning the scattered papers on the desk. Some appeared to be old letters, their ink faded with age, while others were written in a script she could not recognize. One paper in particular caught her attention, an open letter dated from the early 1800s, with the name Lady Blackwood scrawled at the top. Before she could investigate further, she heard Edgar's footsteps growing closer, and she quickly turned, making her way back up the stairs, leaving the room as she had found it, dark, forgotten, and filled with secrets. As she re-emerged into the library, Isabella's mind raced. What was that room? And why had it been hidden away from her? It was as though the mansion itself was urging her to explore its darkest corners, revealing just enough to spark her curiosity but keeping its deepest secrets locked away. The next day, as Isabella dined alone in the drawing room, she could not shake the sense of being watched. It was subtle at first, a flicker of movement from the corner of her eye, the faint rustling of a curtain as if someone were standing just outside the window. But when she looked, there was nothing there. Just the shadows, stretching longer as the daylight waned. She began to notice the oddities in the house more clearly now, how the portraits seemed to follow her wherever she went. How the air in certain rooms felt thick and oppressive, and how the mansion's long-forgotten rooms always seemed to call to her. One evening, as dusk settled over the estate, Isabella overheard a conversation between Lady Eleanor and Edgar. They were speaking in low voices, but she could hear snippets of their exchange. Words like curse, bloodline, and family history filtered through the thick wooden door, piquing her interest. What was the Blackwood family hiding? Why had they chosen to live in isolation, surrounded by such ominous silence? Isabella had no answers, only more questions, questions that tugged at her until she could no longer ignore them. She had to know more. And the deeper she searched, the more she realized that the mansion's secrets were tied to her own bloodline in ways she had yet to comprehend. the tension in the Blackwood estate grew thicker with each passing day. Isabella could no longer shake the feeling that someone, was watching her, even in the most private corners of the mansion. The portraits on the walls seemed to take on a new, unsettling significance, their eyes following her as she moved through the house. The once distant whispers she had heard at night now seemed louder, closer, as if they were just on the other side of the walls, waiting to make themselves known. It was on a particularly stormy night that the visitor arrived, a figure that seemed to step out of the very shadows of the mansion itself. Isabella had been sitting by the fire in the drawing room, the flames casting long, flickering shadows on the walls, when she heard a sudden knock on the door. At first, she assumed it was Edgar, come to offer her the evening's tea, but when she opened the door, she found no one there. The storm outside raged fiercely, the wind howling like some great beast, but the doorstep was empty, save for a lone figure standing in the darkness just beyond the threshold. The visitor was tall and cloaked, their features hidden beneath the folds of a dark hood, and in the dim light, Isabella could make out nothing but the figure's silhouette, sharp and angular against the tempestuous night. "Can I help you?" Isabella's voice trembled slightly, her unease growing by the second. The figure didn't respond immediately, but she could feel their gaze upon her, though she couldn't see their eyes. The figure stepped forward, and before Isabella could protest, they had crossed the threshold and were standing just inside the door, their presence filling the room with an inexplicable chill. "I have come for what is owed." The figure's voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it carried through the room like a distant echo, reverberating against the cold stone walls. Isabella recoiled, her heart pounding in her chest. The words were so cryptic, so chilling, that they left her speechless. She had no idea what the figure meant, but there was something hauntingly familiar about the tone. Something that tugged at her memories in a way she couldn't explain. "Who are you?" Isabella demanded, her voice gaining strength despite the fear that gripped her. The figure reached up and slowly pulled back the hood, revealing the face beneath, a woman, her features sharp and angular, her eyes dark as the night itself. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her hair was long, black, and tangled, like a curtain of midnight that framed her face. Isabella gasped, her breath catching in her throat, for there was something about this woman that struck her with a terrible sense of recognition. It was the same woman from her dreams, the figure in the black velvet gown who had stood at the edge of her vision. Her face obscured by shadows. And now, here she was, standing in front of Isabella, her expression unreadable, her eyes deep pools of darkness that seemed to hold all the secrets of the world. "Do you remember me?" the woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Isabella took a step back, her mind reeling. "No. I don't. I don't know you." The woman smiled faintly, a strange, sorrowful expression. "Perhaps you don't yet, but you will." She glanced around the room, her gaze lingering on the portraits of the Blackwood ancestors that adorned the walls. "This place, these people, your bloodline, your history, they are intertwined with mine. And soon, you will come to understand everything." Before Isabella could respond, the woman turned sharply, as if sensing something beyond the door. Her expression darkened. "They are coming," she murmured, more to herself than to Isabella. Without another word, she turned and glided toward the door. The storm outside howled even louder, as if the very heavens were protesting her departure. The woman stepped out into the night without looking back, and Isabella, frozen in place, could only watch in confusion as the shadowy figure disappeared into the tempest. The wind slammed the door shut behind her with a force that left Isabella shaken to her core. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she stood there for what felt like an eternity. her mind racing with questions. Who was that woman? Why did she look so familiar, and why had she come to the mansion? What was the meaning behind her cryptic words? That night, as the storm raged on, Isabella could not sleep. Her thoughts were consumed by the mysterious visitor and the eerie feeling that her life had just shifted irrevocably. She could feel the walls of the mansion closing in around her, its secrets pulling her deeper into its grasp. She had uncovered so much, yet there was still so much more to discover. The next morning, as the storm finally subsided and the sun emerged from behind the dark clouds, Isabella went in search of answers. She approached Lady Eleanor, hoping for some explanation, but her aunt's behavior had changed. There was something colder in her demeanor, an air of distance that had not been present before. "You saw her, didn't you?" Lady Eleanor asked, her voice flat, as though the question had been anticipated. "Saw who?" Isabella replied, trying to steady her racing pulse. "The woman in the storm," Lady Eleanor said, her tone barely perceptible. "You are not the first to encounter her, and you won't be the last. She has been part of the Blackwood family's history for generations." Isabella's heart sank as she tried to process her aunt's words. "But who is she? Why did she come here?" Lady Eleanor hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "That is a story for another time, my dear. A story you will learn in your own way, in your own time. But know this, the Blackwood family has a price to pay for its past. And now, that price is yours." Isabella recoiled at her aunt's chilling words. The mansion was no longer just a place of shadowed grandeur, it was a prison, and she was caught in its web. And now, with the visitor's cryptic warning hanging in the air, she felt the weight of the past bearing down on her with an intensity she had never known before. The price of the Blackwood family's sins was about to come due, and Isabella's bloodline would be forced to reckon with the darkness that had been buried for centuries. The days following the mysterious visitor's appearance were marked by a creeping sense of inevitability. Isabella found herself increasingly withdrawn, unable to shake the feeling that something was closing in around her, tightening like a noose. The mansion, once a place of eerie charm, now felt like a tomb, its oppressive silence broken only by the distant sounds of the wind and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. Despite Lady Eleanor's cryptic warnings, Isabella could not let go of her need to uncover the truth. Her dreams of the dark-haired woman continued, each night more vivid and haunting than the last. She would wake up in cold sweats, the images of that figure standing just beyond her reach, whispering words she could never quite make out. And the symbols in the hidden chamber. They lingered in her thoughts, as if they had branded themselves into her very soul. The visitor had spoken of a price, of debts owed by the Blackwood family, a price that had yet to be paid. But Isabella could not fathom what it all meant. She had to know. There was no other option now. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered. And it was up to her to put them together, even if it meant walking into the darkness from which they had been concealed for so long. One night, as Isabella sat by the fire in the drawing room, the flickering flames casting long shadows across the walls, she heard a soft, familiar sound. Footsteps in the hallway, soft yet purposeful. Edgar appeared in the doorway, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an expression of unease. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "there is something I believe you should see." Isabella rose from her seat, her heart thudding in her chest. "What is it? What's going on?" Edgar hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. Before stepping aside and revealing a small, hidden passageway behind a tapestry at the back of the room. It was a part of the mansion Isabella had never noticed before, another one of the secrets that had been locked away from her eyes. "This way," Edgar urged, his voice low and tense. He moved ahead, leading her down the narrow passage that twisted beneath the mansion like a forgotten vein. The air grew cold, and Isabella felt a shiver race up her spine. She had the distinct impression that the walls were closing in, pressing on her with an unrelenting force. The passage opened into another small chamber, but this one was unlike any of the others she had seen. The walls were lined with shelves containing ancient books and odd trinkets, items that seemed to belong to another time. Another world. But it was the centerpiece of the room that caught her attention, an old, dust-covered mirror standing tall and imposing in the center of the chamber. The mirror was large, framed in intricate wrought iron, its surface darkened with age. Isabella couldn't help but feel drawn to it, her gaze locked onto its cold, reflective surface. But as she looked deeper, her breath caught in her throat. Something was wrong. The reflection staring back at her wasn't quite right. It was distorted, like the image of a person seen through water, shifting, bending, warping. "This is it," Edgar said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This mirror is the key." Isabella turned to him, her eyes wide. "The key to what?" "The truth," he replied simply, his tone heavy with an unspoken burden. "The truth about the Blackwood family, about the debts that have been paid and the ones that remain. But be warned, what you see here may change everything." Isabella's heart raced as she stepped closer to the mirror, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch its surface. The cold glass felt smooth beneath her fingers, but as she made contact, the reflection before her began to shift again, its edges rippling like water disturbed by a stone. She gasped, stumbling back, her heart hammering in her chest. The reflection had changed. The face staring back at her was no longer her own, no longer the face of a young woman filled with confusion and fear. Instead, it was a face she knew all too well, Lady Eleanor's, but the woman in the mirror was different. Her eyes were hollow, her features twisted in anguish. The image of Eleanor in the reflection opened her mouth, and though no sound emerged, Isabella could feel the echo of her voice reverberate in her mind. "You should not have come." "It is too late," Isabella stumbled back, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "What is this? What does it mean?" Edgar stepped forward, his face grim. "It means that the Blackwood family's past has caught up with us. That the debts we owe, debts that have been buried for generations, are now coming due. Lady Eleanor. She knows this. She has known it all along." Isabella turned to him, her mind spinning. "Lady Eleanor? What does she have to do with this?" Edgar's expression hardened. "She is the keeper of the family's darkest secrets. She made a pact long ago, a pact that has bound the Blackwood name to forces far beyond our understanding. And now, the price is yours to pay." Isabella's mind reeled. The words were too much to comprehend all at once. She had always seen Lady Eleanor as a distant, enigmatic figure, but she never suspected the depths of the darkness that the woman carried within her. The Blackwood family's history was one of wealth and privilege, but it was also one steeped in shadows, shadows that now seemed to be closing in on Isabella herself. Suddenly, the air grew heavier, as if something ancient was stirring in the depths of the mansion. A low, guttural sound echoed from the walls, a noise that seemed to vibrate deep within her chest. Isabella turned toward Edgar, but his face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "It's too late," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The forces we've awakened. They will not stop until they claim what they are owed." Isabella's heart pounded in her ears as the chamber around her seemed to tremble. The mirror rippled again, and this time, the reflection was no longer just of Lady Eleanor, it was of Isabella herself, her eyes dark and hollow, her face twisted with a silent scream, and then everything went black. When Isabella regained consciousness, she found herself back in the drawing room, lying on the settee by the fire. Her head throbbed with a sharp, relentless pain, and her mind was a blur of confusion and terror. The vision in the mirror, Lady Eleanor's haunted reflection, her cryptic words, still echoed in her mind, along with the ominous sounds that had filled the chamber. She could still feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on her, as if the very walls of the mansion were closing in, sealing her fate with every passing second. Her eyes fluttered open, and she saw Edgar standing nearby, his expression filled with concern. But his usual calm demeanor had been replaced by something else, a deep, unspoken fear. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice unsteady. Isabella struggled to sit up, her limbs heavy and uncooperative. She nodded slowly, though the panic inside her was threatening to overwhelm her. "What happened?" I saw something in the mirror. Lady Eleanor. It wasn't her. It was like she was not herself," Edgar finished, his voice low. "I know." Isabella's gaze locked onto his, a growing realization sinking in. "Edgar, what is going on here? What is this curse? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me?" Edgar hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the door, as if ensuring they were alone. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I couldn't tell you. I thought if you didn't know, you might be able to escape it. But the truth is, there's no escaping it, Isabella. The curse of the Blackwood family is not something that can be outrun. It's something that is bound to you, to your blood." He took a deep breath, his face tightening with the weight of what he was about to reveal. The Blackwoods made a pact long ago, one that bound the family to powers beyond mortal comprehension. The price of that pact was always meant to be paid in blood, but Lady Eleanor, your aunt, believed she could control it, keep it from claiming anyone else. But it's too late now. Too late for what? Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the words themselves might bring the curse into full force. "The pact cannot be broken," Edgar said, his voice low and grave. "It was made with an ancient, malevolent force, one that has haunted the Blackwood bloodline for centuries. The force demands payment, not just in wealth, but in souls. And the soul it demands is yours." Isabella's blood ran cold. "Mine?" "Yes. The pact was made by your great-great-grandfather, a man consumed by greed and ambition. He sought immortality, power beyond his wildest dreams, and he turned to dark forces to achieve it. The price, however, was not what he expected. The curse passed down through generations, with each head of the family believing they could contain it. But now, it's your turn. The bloodline must be cleansed. Isabella's mind reeled. The thought of her ancestors' actions, of a pact made with forces beyond human understanding, seemed almost too much to bear. But the pieces were falling into place: the hidden room, the mirror, the woman in the storm. It was all part of a story that had begun long before she arrived at Blackwood Manor. "You mean Lady Eleanor?" Isabella whispered, a dawning realization breaking through her shock. She knows this. She's known it all along." Edgar nodded. "Yes. Lady Eleanor has kept this secret, trying to protect you and the rest of the family from the curse's full wrath. But it was never going to work. The time for avoiding the payment is over. The forces that have been bound to the Blackwood name are stirring again. And they will not rest until the debt is paid." A deep, oppressive silence filled the room as Isabella processed his words. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of fear, anger, and disbelief. How could anyone, escape something so deeply embedded in their bloodline, a curse that stretched across generations? "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice rising, though her fear still clung to her like a heavy cloak. "I didn't want to burden you," Edgar replied softly, his eyes filled with regret. "But now it's all coming to a head. The vision you saw in the mirror, the shadow you felt in the house, the visitor in the storm, they're all signs of the curse awakening. They are all coming for you." Isabella felt the room around her seem to darken, the shadows lengthening in a way that wasn't natural. A chill swept over her, and she could hear the distant sound of whispering, faint, but growing louder. Her pulse quickened. "What do I do?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "How do I stop it? How do I break the curse?" Edgar looked at her with sorrowful eyes. "There's no easy way out. The curse must run its course. It will claim you, Isabella. It will take what it's owed. But there is one thing you can do." "What?" Isabella's voice was sharp with desperation. She would do anything, anything at all, to escape the terrible fate that loomed over her. "The only way to free yourself from the curse," Edgar said quietly, "is to confront the source of it, your great-great-grandfather's pact. The force that he bargained with is still tied to this mansion, and to the Blackwood bloodline. It resides in the very heart of the house, deep beneath the foundation, in a place known only to those who made the deal." Isabella's eyes widened. "And where is that? Where do I find it?" Edgar's expression was grave. "The cellar. It's not just a cellar. It's a place where the pact was sealed, a place where the darkness still lingers. You must go there, confront what's been bound, and destroy it. Only then can the curse be broken." Isabella felt a cold dread settle in her chest. The thought of descending into the depths of the mansion, into a place so steeped in ancient evil, filled her with terror. But she had no choice. She had to try. "If I do this," she said, her voice trembling but determined, "will it end? Will it stop the curse?" Edgar nodded, though his face was pale. "It's the only way. But be warned, the forces you will face are not human. They are ancient, powerful, and they will not give up their hold without a fight. You must be prepared." Isabella nodded, her resolve hardening. She had no choice. Her family's legacy, the blood that ran through her veins, was drawing her into the heart of darkness. The mansion, its walls heavy with the weight of its past, was calling her. And it was time to face whatever horrors it held within. The air was thick with tension as Isabella made her way through the grand corridors of Blackwood Manor, her every step echoing like a drumbeat in the silence of the house. She had heard Edgar's warning, and it weighed heavily on her mind. The cellar, where the pact had been sealed, where the darkness had taken root, was not a place she wanted to visit. The very thought of what might lie beneath the manor, hidden from sight for centuries, filled her with an overwhelming sense of dread. Yet, there was no turning back now. The curse of the Blackwood family had already claimed so much, her ancestors, her aunt, and now, it seemed, it was her turn to face whatever malevolent force had been bound to their bloodline. She had to confront it, had to destroy it, or else she would become another lost soul, another victim of the pact made long ago. As she descended into the mansion's bowels, the air grew colder, and the scent of damp earth and decay clung to the walls. The staircase was narrow, the stone steps slick with moisture, and the flickering light from her candle cast long, shifting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Each step seemed to lead her deeper into the heart of the darkness, further from the world she knew. The cellar door loomed before her, an ancient, creaking barrier that seemed to resist her every movement. It was as though the house itself did not want her to enter, did not want the secrets of the past to be uncovered. But Isabella could feel the pull, the weight of the family's sins pressing down on her, demanding that she take this final step. With a determined breath, she pushed open the door, the hinges groaning in protest. The cellar beyond was vast, far larger than she had imagined, stretching out like a labyrinth of stone and shadow. The ceiling was low, the walls lined with centuries-old barrels, crates, and forgotten relics of a past long buried. The air was thick with the smell of earth, must, and something darker, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She took a cautious step inside, the light from her candle casting faint glows on the stone walls. Her heart raced, each beat loud in her ears, as she felt the weight of the history surrounding her, so much death, so much sacrifice. She had the distinct feeling that she was not alone, though no one was visible. "Is anyone here?" She called out, her voice trembling slightly in the vast, oppressive silence. There was no answer. But she could feel it, the presence, watching from the shadows, waiting for her to take the next step. She walked deeper into the cellar, her footsteps echoing eerily, until she reached the farthest corner of the room. There, set into the stone floor, was a trapdoor, ancient, heavy, and covered with dust. The faintest symbols were etched into the wood, symbols that seemed to shimmer in the dim candlelight. They looked disturbingly familiar, like the ones she had seen in the hidden chamber, the ones that had haunted her dreams. Isabella bent down, her hands shaking as she grasped the edge of the trapdoor and pulled. The wood groaned, and for a moment, she feared it would not open. But with a final, resounding creak, it gave way, revealing a dark, narrow passage leading even deeper into the earth. The cold that emanated from the passage was unlike anything she had ever felt, a biting chill that seeped into her very bones, numbing her body with its touch. But she could not stop now. She had come too far. There was no turning back. With a deep breath, Isabella descended into the passage, the light from her candle flickering as she moved forward. The air grew colder still, and she could hear the faintest sounds, whispers, like voices speaking just out of reach, echoing through the narrow tunnel. The deeper she went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as though the very walls were alive, pressing in on her, urging her to turn back, to leave this cursed place behind. But Isabella pushed on, her resolve strengthening with each step. She had to finish this. She had to destroy whatever force had been bound to her family, had to free herself and her ancestors from the chains that had been forged long ago. At last, the tunnel opened up into a cavernous space, an underground chamber so vast it seemed to stretch on forever. The stone walls glimmered with an unnatural sheen, and the air was thick with an oppressive, suffocating energy. The light from her candle seemed dim, swallowed by the darkness that filled the room. And then, she saw it. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, ancient and weathered, its surface covered in symbols, arcane runes that pulsed with a faint, sickly light. The altar was surrounded by tall, blackened pillars, each one etched with the same symbols, the same dark runes that had haunted Isabella for so long. It was here, she realized, that the pact had been sealed, where the force had been bound to the Blackwood bloodline. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing moment, like the sound of something ancient awakening. And then, from the shadows, something began to emerge, shifting, indistinct, but undeniably present. A figure, tall and cloaked in darkness, its shape flickering and twisting like smoke in the dim light. Isabella froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the presence, cold, malevolent, and ancient, pressing in on her, filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. The figure moved toward her, its form shifting as if it were made of shadow itself. It was no longer human, no longer a form that could be comprehended. It was something older, something far more terrible than she could ever have imagined. Isabella Blackwood, the figure spoke, its voice a low, guttural rasp, like the sound of 1,000 whispers. You have come to face me, to break the chains of your ancestors' sins. But know this, you cannot destroy what was never meant to be destroyed. The pact has been made. The blood has been spilled. And now, you will pay the price. Isabella stood frozen in place. Her breath caught in her throat. The creature, whatever it was, moved closer, its dark form swirling around her like a storm. And as it reached out with a shadowy tendril, Isabella felt her body go cold, her very soul being pulled toward it, drawn into the abyss. But then, something inside her stirred, a flicker of defiance. She had come this far. She could not allow this creature to take her, to claim her soul. She had to fight back. With trembling hands, Isabella raised the candle high, its light shining brighter than it had before, pushing against the darkness. The figure recoiled, its form shuddering as if the light burned it. Isabella took a step forward, her voice trembling but strong. I will not be your sacrifice, she said, her words cutting through the air. I will not let this curse claim me. I will destroy what you are, what you represent, and free my family from the chains you've placed upon us. For a moment, the creature hesitated, its form flickering, as if uncertain. And then, with a violent howl, it lunged toward her. The creature lunged, its tendrils of darkness twisting and writhing like serpents in the air, reaching out for Isabella with terrifying speed. The very earth beneath her feet seemed to tremble as if the foundation of the world was cracking. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing through the chamber, but she did not flinch. She could feel the weight of her ancestors' suffering, the crushing burden of the curse that had tormented her family for generations. But in that moment, as the shadowy figure barreled toward her, Isabella knew she could not afford to let fear control her. With one last, desperate breath, she threw her hands forward, her fingers curling around the handle of the candle. As if guided by an unseen force, the flame flared, blazing bright and pure, casting a searing light that pierced the oppressive darkness around her. The figure howled in pain, its form twisting violently, as if the light was burning it from the inside out. "You cannot escape," the creature rasped, its voice now trembling, full of a strange, twisted rage. "You cannot destroy me. The pact was made. The debt must be paid." Isabella's grip tightened around the candle as she took a step forward. "No. The price has been paid for long enough. You've taken enough from my family. I'm ending it. Now." With those words, the flame surged higher, brighter, until it seemed to engulf the entire chamber in a blaze of white light. The creature recoiled, its form contorting in agony as the light burned it, eating away at its shadowy flesh. The runes etched into the walls began to crack, the stone groaning under the pressure, as though the very forces that had held the creature in place for centuries were now unraveling. The shadow screamed, an inhuman, gut-wrenching sound that echoed through the cavern, reverberating off the stone walls and shaking the ground beneath her feet. The air grew thick with a palpable energy, crackling and heavy, as if the space itself was being torn apart. Isabella felt a surge of power coursing through her, not her own, but something older, something tied to the bloodline she carried. The Blackwood family had made this pact, but now, it was time to break it. She could feel the spirits of her ancestors stirring, their voices whispering in her ear, urging her to finish what they could not. She raised the candle higher, the light pulsing in time with her heartbeat. The creature writhed, its form becoming less solid, flickering like a fading dream. "You cannot destroy me. I am eternal," it hissed, its voice more desperate now, filled with fear. "Not eternal," Isabella replied, her voice steady and strong. "Not when the light reveals the truth. Not when the curse is broken." And with that final declaration, Isabella thrust the flame toward the creature, the light blinding in its intensity. The darkness screamed, one last, horrific cry, before it was consumed by the light. It dissolved, breaking apart into nothingness, scattering like ash in the wind. The air went silent. The oppressive weight that had clung to the chamber lifted in an instant, as if a great burden had been released. The glow of the candle dimmed to its normal flame, and the shadows receded, leaving only the faintest trace of their presence in the cracks of the stone walls. Isabella stood there, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths, staring at the place where the creature had once been. The silence around her was deafening, but it was a different kind of silence, one of peace, of finality. She had done it. The curse had been broken. The dark force that had haunted her family for generations was gone, erased by the light she had summoned. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt free, but the victory came at a cost. As the reality of what she had just done began to sink in, Isabella's legs gave way beneath her, and she collapsed to her knees on the cold stone floor. She had no strength left, the ordeal had drained her entirely. The weight of everything she had endured, the curse, the fear, the battle, hit her all at once, and she felt a deep exhaustion settle in her bones. From somewhere behind her, Isabella heard the soft sound of footsteps. She turned, blinking, and saw Edgar standing at the entrance to the chamber, his expression a mixture of awe and relief. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with wonder. You destroyed it." Isabella nodded, her gaze distant. "It's over. It's finally over." Edgar approached cautiously, his eyes never leaving her. "But how did you know?" Isabella looked down at the now dimmed candle in her hands, the flame barely flickering. "I didn't know. I knew it had to be done. I had to stop it." She let out a slow breath, a sense of calm washing over her now that the darkness was gone. The weight of the mansion, the curse, the torment, it had all lifted. But it wasn't just the creature she had vanquished. It was the legacy of suffering, the endless chain of blood that had bound her family for centuries. That, too, was gone, but even as the light of the candle dimmed, Isabella knew that she had not just freed herself, she had freed them all. Her ancestors, the spirits trapped by the pact, would finally find peace. Edgar knelt beside her, gently taking her hand. "You're safe now. We're free." Isabella met his eyes, her own tired but resolute. "Yes," she whispered. "We're free." The journey had been long, and the cost high, but in the end, she had broken the curse. And with it, the Blackwood family would no longer be bound by darkness. The dawn broke slowly over the manor, the first rays of sunlight creeping hesitantly through the broken windows of the chamber. For the first time in as long as Isabella could remember, the light felt warm and welcome. The oppressive darkness that had clung to the Blackwood estate for centuries had been lifted, and now, the world seemed new, silent, still, and yet filled with a strange kind of hope. Edgar had remained by her side throughout the night, watching over her as she recovered from the exertion of her battle with the creature. It had been hours since the darkness had been vanquished, but she still felt the lingering weight of the experience. Her body ached with fatigue, her muscles sore from the strain of the confrontation. But her spirit felt lighter than it had in years. The manor, too, seemed to have transformed. The once chilly air had warmed, and the rooms, once oppressive and cold, now held an almost welcoming atmosphere. The mansion was still a place of history, of secrets, but it no longer felt like a prison. The shadows had retreated, leaving behind only the echoes of the past, a past that, though dark, no longer held the power to control them. As Isabella made her way up the stairs, she found herself standing before the grand portrait of her ancestors that had hung in the entrance hall for generations. The faces of the Blackwood family had always seemed so distant, so solemn, but now she saw them differently. They were not just figures frozen in time. They were people who had been bound by a curse they never asked for, a fate they could not escape. Isabella took a deep breath, her eyes tracing the faces in the portrait. "You're free," she whispered softly, her voice breaking the silence. "Finally, you're free." Edgar, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. "It's over, Isabella. You broke the curse. You freed us all." She nodded, but the weight of it all was not gone. "I still don't know how to live without it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do we move forward, when everything we knew was built on this darkness?" He reached out and gently took her hand. "We move forward together. We build something new. A life free of the past." Her eyes met his, and in them, she saw not just the relief of having survived, but the possibility of something more, a future unburdened by the chains of the Blackwood curse. There was no more darkness to haunt her steps, no more shadow to cloud her heart. She could finally breathe, finally live without fear. In the days that followed, Isabella began the difficult process of rebuilding, not just the manor, but her life. The estate was still in need of repairs, the centuries-old walls needing work and restoration, but the true task was more personal. She had to rebuild her sense of self, to reconcile the woman she had become with the legacy of her family. And yet, as time passed, she found herself drawing strength from the very thing that had once haunted her, the legacy of the Blackwood family. She was no longer weighed down by it. Instead, she saw it as a challenge to overcome, a history she could honor by living freely, without the fear of the past hanging over her. Isabella's relationship with Edgar deepened as well. What had begun as a bond formed through shared grief and horror grew into something more, something real. He had stood by her side through it all, never wavering, and together, they began to envision a future untainted by the curse that had once threatened to consume them both. The townspeople, who had long whispered about the Blackwood estate and its eerie reputation, began to notice the change. The manor, once a symbol of dread, now stood as a monument to resilience. Isabella and Edgar were seen more often, not as reclusive figures cloaked in mystery, but as a couple determined to heal the wounds of the past and create a new beginning. And though the darkness that had once haunted Blackwood Manor was gone, Isabella knew that the shadows of history would always be a part of her, an indelible mark on her soul. But rather than hide from them, she learned to embrace the lessons they offered. She would never forget the price that had been paid, the sacrifices made, and the horrors faced. But she had learned, too, that the past need not define her. As the years went by, the manor flourished. The gardens bloomed with life, the halls were filled with laughter, and the heavy burden of the Blackwood legacy was finally laid to rest. Isabella and Edgar grew old together, their love becoming a symbol of the new life that had emerged from the ashes of the past. One quiet evening, as they sat together on the balcony overlooking the estate, Isabella looked out at the peaceful landscape, a sense of peace settling over her. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't done it?" Edgar asked, his voice soft in the stillness of the night. She smiled gently, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I try not to. What matters now is that we're here. That we made it." He squeezed her hand, his voice filled with warmth. "And we're free." Isabella's heart swelled with a quiet joy. Yes, they were free. The chains of the past were gone. The darkness had been defeated. And though the road ahead would not always be easy, she knew now that they could face whatever came with the strength of a new beginning. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky above Blackwood Manor, Isabella knew that, at last, the long night was over.